Buchenwald concentration camp is almost centrally located in Germany. It's about a 2.5 hour drive from Nuremberg and about a 3 hour drive from Berlin. The camp was built in 1937 and was liberated by the U.S. Army on April 11, 1945. In this current day aerial view, you can see the prisoner camp up here. The semicircular area here is where SS offices were located. And then down here at the bottom is the GDR Memorial, which was completed in 1958. Here we are zoomed into the main camp area. The parking lot is in this semicircular area, and the information building is right here. We'll start our tour over here where the trains would arrive, and then we'll follow this long path ending at the commandant's office and the main entrance to the camp. Here we see the remains of the Buchenwald railway station. The tracks lie on either side of the central platform. In the 8 years of the camp's existence, almost 280,000 people from over 50 countries arrived at Buchenwald. Upon disembarking from the trains, prisoners were made to walk along a long path to the main gate. This segment of road was known as the Caracho Path. At the site on the left, a pole once stood with the words Caracho Path on it. At the top of the sign was a depiction of prisoners running down the path. This part of the sign is now housed in the camp museum. This is a view looking down the Caracho Path in the direction of the rail station. To the right is this picture enlarged. It shows prisoners walking down the Caracho Path in 1943. Located just outside the main gate to the prisoners' camp, this building is part of the remains of the camp headquarters, where the commandant's office was located. This is a view from the headquarters building, looking towards the main camp entrance. We'll now take a closer look at the gate building, which houses prison cells, the main watchtower, and the camp gate. Next, we'll move into the camp and take a 360-degree view of the camp from this large open area, which was known as the roll call square. And this is where prisoners were made to stand hours on end, no matter what the weather, while roll call was taken. Then we'll turn to the right and make our way over here to the crematorium. To the right is a picture of one of the many prison cells. You can see the peephole that guards used to monitor the prisoners. You can also see a flap that opens, allowing food to be passed through. The sign reads, "Arrest cells, bunker." Bunker was the name of the camp's prison. It was the worst place of torture in Buchenwald concentration camp. The cells were filled with prisoners from February 1938 to 1945. Some were kept in this place for months, This torture ended with death for many of them. In cell number 1, people spent the last night before their execution in the crematorium. To the left is looking down the corridor of cells. In the middle is inside one of the cells, and you can see the bed over here that folds down. To the right is a latch on a cell door that someone left flowers on as a sign of remembrance. So we just came out of this door where the prison cells were. Straight ahead is the camp gate with the main watchtower above it. If you notice the time on the clock, it is permanently set to 3:15, which marks the time U.S. troops liberated the camp on April 11th, 1945. The gate contains the phrase in German, jedem das seine, which means to each his own. As we pass through the gate, we find ourselves in a large open area known as the roll call square. To give you an idea of how large this area is, you can see in this picture from 1944, the area is packed with thousands of prisoners during roll call. On the next slide, we'll take a 360-degree view of the camp from this location. From the roll call square, we'll move to the right, making our way to this building, the crematorium. On one of the walls inside is this picture, taken when the camp was liberated. This was one of the many piles of corpses the liberators were shocked to find. This particular picture was taken from this area here. We'll enter from this building to the left and then make our way around. Here we enter a pathology room where corpses were placed on this table. A sign on the wall reads, "The pathological facilities." Postmortems were performed even before pathological facilities were set up at the same time as the crematorium in 1940. These examinations primarily served the purpose of producing formal records to cover up the real causes of death. From 1940 onwards, gold teeth were removed from corpses. A short time later, the production of articles from human skin and human heads, shrunk to fist size, commenced. These articles were distributed among the SS as presents. The corpses were primarily used by the pathological department to prepare specimens and skeletons for anatomical collections. Some of the medical tools used are displayed in these cases. This room is filled with empty urns. Initially, urns were sent to family members of the deceased. However, the Nazis mixed all of the ashes together of many people and randomly poured them into urns before sending them to families. Later, Nazis moved away from urns and simply dumped the ashes into fields. We are now in the basement of the crematorium, in the corpse cellar. Do you see these hooks located around the room? The Nazis used these hooks to strangle 1,100 men, women, and teens. This is a chute. Corpses would be tossed down the chute and fall into the cellar below. From this view, the chute is to our back. Corpses would be taken to this corner of the room and then put onto this lift, which would then be raised to the furnaces in the crematorium above. Now we are in the room above the corpse cellar. Here are the doors to the lift that would open, revealing the pile of corpses inside. The corpses would then be taken across the room to the furnaces and burned. To the left, a solitary rose. To the right, stones left by visitors in remembrance of lives lost. So we started at the main gate, entered the roll call square, and visited the crematorium. Now we'll make our way down this path to the depot building, where the camp's main exhibition hall is located. From this view, you can also see all of these rectangular areas. These are the outlines of where barracks once stood. As we walk down the path, we see a cart that prisoners were made to pull, commemoration plaques, and markers for the barracks or blocks. This marker reads Block 17, and you can see the outline of where the barrack once stood. When walking down the path, I had initially overlooked this tree stump. The tree was known as the Goethe oak. That's the German pronunciation. It's spelled Goethe. A sign near it shows what the oak tree looked like in 1944. The depot building is to the left and is where visitors can learn about the camp's history and see artifacts. To the right is a building that served as the disinfection station, where new arrivals to the camp would have their heads shaved, bodies disinfected, and given their striped uniforms. This is a sign outside the depot building which reads, "This depot was used by the SS to store the civilian clothing and personal possessions of the inmates, as well as the uniforms, shoes, and metal eating utensils used in the camp. The inmates were sent by tens of thousands from the railway station through the camp gate to the disinfection building and the depot. Most of them landed in the little camp to be sent on from there to one of the arms production commandos. There were thousands of adolescents and children amongst them. One of the youngest, a 4-year-old Jewish boy from Poland, was hidden here by political prisoners. Over 900 others survived in the children's barracks number 8 and 66. This is one of the artifacts in the exhibition hall. This card reads, quote, The extremely heavy physical labor leads to hernias in many of the inmates. They receive hernia trusses to enable them to continue working, end quote. So hernias can occur with heavy lifting or straining. Generally speaking, this will cause a tear in the abdominal wall muscle, allowing part of the intestine to squeeze through and cause a bulge. There are different types of hernias. Based on the shape of this truss, it was likely used for inguinal hernias, which are hernias in the groin. These two padded areas would have pressed against the left and right groin, helping to push the intestine back in, if you will. Nazis considered themselves an elite master race, and they were encouraged to have large families. I came across these medals in a display case. This card reads, quote, Cross of Honor awarded to women with many children, 1930s. If you notice, there are different ones. There's a gold, silver, and bronze. From what I read elsewhere, the bronze was given to women with 4 or 5 kids. Silver was for having 6 or 7 kids, and the gold was given to women with 8 or more kids. This display had a couple of Nazi youth toys. On the top is a tin drum, and below it is a Nazi youth board game. This is an expandable baton that Nazis would use to beat prisoners. This case displays several forms of prisoner uniforms. This uniform caught my eye because it was so different from the rest. When the Nazis invaded Yugoslavia, they confiscated Royal Yugoslavian Guard uniforms. Prisoners of Buchenwald in the camp band had to wear these when they were made to perform for the Nazis. These are some of the spoons, bowls, cups, and ladles that were found after liberation. In most cases, prisoners were given 1 spoon and 1 bowl, which were essentially their only possessions. As their only possessions, prisoners would often try to label them in some way to show who they belonged to. To the left are homemade knives prisoners made from whatever they could find. To the right are a dog and an elephant a mother made for her 2 children from materials she took from her camp workplace. This chess game was made by prisoners using scraps of wood. One of the camp survivors kept it after liberation and later donated it to the museum. Exiting the depot, we'll make our way to the left and we'll pass blocks 45 and 50, and then we'll wind our way around here to the little camp and block 66. From there, we'll make our way around here to a reconstructed barrack and block 46. To the left is an enlarged picture of this sign. It shows the remains of the camp road between 2 of the blocks. You can see the road here, and then one of the remains of a block, which would be this building here. After passing through the disinfection building and the depot building, many of the new arrivals initially stayed in Block 45, which was also known as the Transit Block. Several commemorative stones, like the one on the right, are in this area. There are specific commemorative stones in the remembrance of groups such as conscientious objectors, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, Bulgarian political prisoners, Spanish Republicans, and members of the Allied Air Force who were imprisoned here. Next are the remains of Block 50. Blocks 50 and 46 were part of the SS Hygiene Institute. In these blocks, they did experiments on prisoners, many involving typhus, gas gangrene, and experimental vaccines. Sadly, it was not just the Nazis who were involved in these experiments. The Nazis worked hand in hand with pharmaceutical and medical institutes. Many of those who were experimented on died as a result of what they were put through. Near the back of the camp was an area known as Little Camp. A sign posted in the area reads, "The special zone known as the Little Camp was set up as a quarantine area to keep epidemics away from the main camp. It consisted of windowless stable barracks, each originally intended for 50 horses, in which up to 1,900 inmates were accommodated. The SS brought prisoners here from every German-occupied country and put them to hard labor. The majority were sent on to one of the many out camps. Forced to live under the miserable hygiene conditions, starving and plagued by vermin, they were unable to survive in the horse barracks for longer than a few weeks. In the short period from January to the end of March 1945, during which the evacuation transports arrived from Auschwitz and Gross-Rosen, over 5,000 prisoners died here. In the picture on the sign to the right, the caption reads, "Seen in a little camp barrack following liberation." This is actually a well-known photo that you may have seen before. And if you look closely, right here, you can see survivor Elie Wiesel. He would later go on to be a famous author, activist, and professor. This sign shows the layout of the little camp. In a minute, we'll take a closer look at Block 66, which was the children's block at the very back of the camp. On the next slide, we'll look at the remains of the latrine and washroom, which are numbers 3 and 4. The latrine building was the only building made of brick in the little camp. The washroom would have been in this area, and the latrines in this area. You have to remember the washroom basically just had water. They weren't given soap or towels, and the latrines did not consist of toilets, but rather holes in the ground. This memorial in the little camp was constructed in 2002. It was designed by architect Stephen B. Jacobs, who was actually a child survivor of the camp. Places where inmates arrive from are memorialized in the stone. In the very back of the camp lies the remains of Block 66, where children were kept. The sign reads, By the end of 1944, trains full of people, among them a lot of youth and children, were arriving in Buchenwald every week. They came from the concentration camps and forced labor camps for Jews in occupied Poland. The SS crowded them into the little camp. People who were wasting away and dying filled the miserable barracks. The struggle for survival was intensified by the horrible conditions, and many lost all hope. In mid-January 1945, political prisoners set up a refuge for Jewish youth in order to facilitate their survival, known as Youth Bloc 66. Under the guidance of the Czech communist political prisoner Antonin Kalina, who was supported by the illegal International Camp Committee and by the Jewish resistance, 1,000 youth found shelter and help there in the worst months of the camp. Some of them ultimately ended up being sent on death marches, but most of them could be saved. Of note, there was a documentary made in 2012 called Kinderblock 66, Return to Buchenwald, that I highly recommend. You can find it on some of the streaming services. This is a view from Block 66, looking back towards the camp entrance. So you can really get a sense of how remotely the children were kept, which likely helped in their survival. Now we'll start working our way back towards the front of the camp. This is the only barrack that is still standing at Buchenwald. The sign reads, "The barrack located on this spot served as additional accommodation for sick inmates during the period of the camp's catastrophic overcrowding in the spring of 1945. In the early 1950s, the barrack was dismantled and used for administrative purposes by a company in southern Thuringen before being returned to Buchenwald and reconstructed in 1994. You may recall from earlier that blocks 46 and 50 were parts of the SS Hygiene Institute. We previously visited the remains of Block 50, which lie at the opposite end of this picture near the depot. These were the blocks where they did medical experiments, including typhus experiments. These are the remains of Block 46. Up near the administrative buildings are the remains of the SS dog kennels, which I was surprised to come across. Although the camp may not appear that big in this aerial view, I spent 4.5 hours walking the grounds, and there were still a couple of places I didn't have time to see. After visiting the main camp, I drove down here to see the GDR Memorial. Here we've zoomed into the GDR Memorial. The monument is on the side of a very large hill, so as I walked down along this path, it was all downhill. And then you cross the Avenue of Nations before climbing back upstairs to get to the bell tower and the commemorative figural group. You can also see these 3 circular regions. These are ring graves and are areas where the SS buried thousands of corpses. This is the path walking down the hill. This is a little bit farther down the hill, approaching the first ring grave here on the right. And to the left, the beginning of the Avenue of Nations. Here's a view along the Avenue of Nations. And this is one of the 3 ring graves. To the left is the ascent up to the bell tower. To the right over here is what the bell tower looks like. Within it contains ashes from other concentration camps. The middle picture is from the top of the stairs, and at the far end you can see one of the other ring graves. At the top of the stairs, in front of the bell tower, is a statue called the Commemorative Figural Group. Just as they look out upon the vast landscape, we too must always stand up and keep their stories and memories alive.